Hello and welcome to Harry Cole's Saves the West, the show where American grit meets British backbone. It's October 7th, a day that will live in infamy for any human with a head and a heart. The deadliest day for Jews since the Holocaust didn't just start a war in Gaza, it exposed a moral fracture in the West. Remember those chants? Ceasefire now. Well, there is a ceasefire deal on the table now, and it's been met with silence. Where are the celebs? Where are the Instagram activists, the humanitarians? If it was really about peace, they'd be demanding Hamas take this deal. But it was never about peace. It was about hate. The scum who raped and murdered Israelis are now being celebrated on Western streets, under police protection and under trade union banners. There's no clearer sign to me that the West has lost its way than the 2-year anniversary of October 7th being marked not with sombre reflection, but cosplaying, Keffiyeh-wearing Hamas sympathisers taken to campuses. British students have been chanting, Israel is Arab, intifada. Intifada. Let's see it. And tonight, a group named Intifada 87, the year that Hamas was formed, have been granted permission by the British government to march through London. Tonight I'm joined by extremism expert Lord Walney, Times journalist Iain Martin and commentator Adrienne Gray to discuss all this. Lord Walney, you were the government's former advisor on extremism. You can't possibly conclude that they've failed to put a lid on this.
That's right. There's a lot of debate about, do the police have enough powers to stop certain protests? I don't think they do, but they absolutely have the power to stop this. It is a grotesque insult to the victims of the 7th of October massacres. Jewish people are reeling from the attacks last week, and Intifada 1987. I mean, it's absolutely clear.
Just for listeners and viewers that won't understand the significance of that, explain that. Intifada 87, obviously the first Intifada, the Palestinian wave of bombings across the world, was launched in 97, the year of Hamas. Who are these guys? Why the hell are they not prescribed?
And what you often get in these circumstances is the police will say, yes, but there can be a number of meanings to these words.
What, like the word jihad, when they said a number of words for the word jihad?
It can mean a struggle.
Yeah, or it could be the name of the guy
It could be an inner spiritual struggle.
Yeah.
It is absolutely clear in this context, Intifada 1987, on the anniversary of 7th of October, with all that anger, that is about an armed struggle. That is about support for Hamas. The police absolutely have the power to stop that and to charge people. And what the Home Secretary should be doing tonight is she should be on the phone to Sir Mark Rowley, the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, demanding to know why the police are allowing this demonstration with conditions, rather than saying, on your bike, I'm going to the Home Secretary, I'm going to the government to get this stopped.
Iain Martin, the British government in various guises under Conservatives and then Labour have been struggling for this. What is this damage does you think this does to the public's perception of the government? It looks completely powerless right now to stop a sewer of hatred rolling through the streets.
Well, it does. I mean, to be frank, it just makes me embarrassed to be British. It's just staggering that this is happening. On a basic level of humanity, just what's the thought process like that you think on today of all days, considering what happened 2 years ago, you think today is the day where I'm going to go out on the streets. And you saw in those images, people are actually laughing and enjoying it and treating it like sport. The original sin with this, Britain is facing this disaster because after those horrific attacks on October the 7th, there was a failure of nerve by the then Conservative government. And other governments, like the French and the Germans, did behave more robustly in those couple of weeks afterwards and just said, our cities are not going to be turned over to this sick sport every weekend or every other weekend. And every time those groups tried to, individual cities in France, for example, just said, local authorities have said it's not going to be happen. A national decision was taken on that basis. And of course, France has its own anti-Semitism problem. But in Britain, a catastrophic mistake was made somewhere between the police and the government, and these marches started, this sort of festival of hate, And it now culminates on the second anniversary with this happening on the streets of our capital city. It's just
former British Home Secretary Sir Braverman was all but sacked for calling these hate marches. How do we, John, on the language around this? Are we just too lily-livered? You know, is it a political correctness thing, or is the law just completely so badly drafted? How do we fix this beyond toughening up our rhetoric?
I think we've been taken in by the idea that this is all about peace in the Middle East. Sure, it is for some of the people who turn up, but there is a core, and there's a core of these marchers whom this is about a hatred of Israel that actually spills over into a hatred of Jewish people. And you've seen that with the criminality, the support for terrorism around the edges of those marches. And yes, there was not nearly enough done early on to say no to this, but also the law is lacking here, because what Jewish community leaders have been saying for well over a year now, and I've been backing them up with a report to government, that actually they shouldn't have to put up with this week after week. The right to protest is sacrosanct, and sometimes there are going to be protests on issues that people like, and sometimes in ways that they don't like, but they do not need, and they should not have a right to be out on the street every week, making those city centres a misery and a place of intimidation for Jewish people. And the government can come forward and change the law. They've made an announcement at the weekend, but what they've actually done,
slightly woolly announcement.
What they've actually done, yes, they're talking about the issue, which is good, but they've said that they are going to change the law. Actually, in the areas that they've talked about, the law has already been changed within the last couple of years. They are not going far enough, because what they need to say is that on a day like this, a protest should not be able to go ahead at all. And they're not saying that. They're only saying, oh, well, we'll change the street, or we'll change the time. It's not good enough.
Adrienne, Donald Trump wouldn't put up with this sort of thing, would he? You've had your own anti-Semitic problems on US campuses. But, you know, the streets of Washington tonight, the streets of New York aren't blighted by these sorts of protests. How's it different?
Yeah, from hearing from you guys, it seems like we need some Trump energy over there. Okay, we've been fighting this narrative. We've been fighting all of these protests that, by the way, become dangerous more often than not. They're burning cities down there, you know, so we've been cutting through the narrative because there's been a rise in anti-Semitism, as you said, on the college campuses, everywhere like that. And I think in American media, it's been particularly challenging because we have people that have platforms, influencers, and we have people that are funded by people to say certain things that are anti-Semitic. So we've been really fighting that, but President Trump has stood strong, fighting against this narrative from day one, and it sounds like you guys need a little bit of that energy over there.
Iain, what does Donald Trump energy look like in Britain? Have they, you know, who is the one to fix this? I mean, it seems to me that the government, you know, as Lord Walney was saying there, are just sort of, you know, making noises but not actually doing anything.
Well, there's this guy called Nigel Farage.
A regular discussion on the topic of discussion on this show, it has to be said.
He thinks it might be him, that he thinks he might be the answer. But it is, yeah, you can see a scenario, it's another policy area in the UK where if the mainstream parties who are collapsing, I mean, essentially, you know, the Tories are down, who are having their conference this week in Manchester, down at, I don't know what, 12 to 14 points in the polls. Labour are collapsing as well. If they don't have an entirely new approach to this kind of problem, it's not just this, it's the small boats crisis, you know, a whole wave of other kind of problems afflicting Britain, then if they can't fix these problems, it's clear that voters are going to look to someone who can. Now, it's a whole other complicated discussion about whether Nigel Farage can do that. I'm sceptical about whether he can implement a highly, you know, complicated policy program and deliver. He's a brilliant showman. But that's a slightly different question. At the moment, about a third to 40% of voters in the UK see this kind of stuff, these appalling scenes today, and essentially say enough. And the old party system seems incapable of adapting and dealing with these problems because of this sort of thicket of human rights laws, the way in which judiciary has developed, just decades and decades of this, that you can't then eventually have a leader who just says, right, stop, enough.
Adrienne, I mean, Donald Trump is sending the National Guard to Washington. He's trying to send it into Chicago. We've seen violent attacks on ICE centres in Portland, in Texas. Political violence isn't just on the streets of London. Explain to us a little bit about how Donald Trump has reacted to it, where the sort of political dividing lines are in the US, and what the UK could take from what that Trump energy looks like.
Well, the Trump energy is he's going to call it like it is. And he has said multiple times, this is domestic terrorism. And it's associated with the left. Look, the bullets are flying in one direction. The houses are being burned. The cities are being burned down from one direction. So when you see a repeated pattern over and over and over, he says, this is domestic terrorism, it's of the left, and we're done. And he creates an action item and he signs off on it and he proceeds to just follow through with what he says. And from the start, President Trump is promises made, promises kept. Whether it's immigration, terrorism, whatever have you, he's going to move forward. He's trying to solve for the peace right now in Israel and Hamas and all of that. He's trying to bring peace in the Middle East. And believe me, he's working hard. He said he almost has all the Arab nations on board.
Well,
so we'll see what happens. Yeah.
Lord Walney, you've again straying into your area of expertise across this. Is this domestic political terrorism we're seeing on both sides of the pond, or is the Trump rhetoric a little bit overcooked, or this is what we should be declaring on the streets of London?
I think
these people are terrorists.
I think thus far we have been fortunate that the extremism and aggression that we've seen in London so far in the main has not gone as far as the appalling scenes that we have seen, for example, in Portland,
in Texas,
where genuinely areas have become a no-go zone. They've been quasi-militarized, people with covering their identities, all black military, black bloc tactics. Now,
Antifa and their combats and hats. And, who's paying for these? Well, that's where the money coming from as well. Who is, these people? Who is funding them? That's sort of, who is paying them to not be at work but to be sitting outside ICE centres all day? And do you suspect there's sort of outside influence in this?
Yeah, well, hostile states to the West, to America and the UK, have long for many decades have sought to fund and foment discontent. It's an age-old tactic, and it is really important, I think, that our agencies can try to follow
who are we really talking about here?
Right. So you have got Iran as a chief as
agitator, organizer, funder.
Exactly. Certainly in the UK, where there is levels of funding that is going into community organisations, to charities, the IRGC, which have been prescribed properly as a terrorist organisation here, but not in the UK. They are active, and it is a genuine, on one level, violent threat on our streets, but then on the other, there is that wave of being able to pump resources and energy into extremist organisations because they want to see us tearing ourselves apart, and they want to see good people losing heart in the West, and that is what you are seeing. So it's vital that we can push back against
Martin,
this.
Why haven't the British government not prescribed the Iranian Revolutionary Guard as a sort of an enemy when the Americans have? There was also wishy-washy talk of allowing communications and back-channel diplomacy, but it does look a little bit bizarre that we're out on a limb here.
Yeah. So clearly a mistake. Just on that financial point, though, I think the thing which is not properly understood in the UK is the way in which the funding for a lot of those groups is not really transparent, right? So I'm not accusing. There are all sorts of
Back to the days of Moscow Gold funding the peaceniks, is it?
There are all sorts of legitimate NGOs who don't do this. So I'm not saying every NGO, but when you speak to people in the system that there are ways in which money can come, through a bank account in Malta, through France, then through now, even despite money laundering rules. And what does a donation really mean? Where does it come from? Where did it originate?
Follow the money.
Yeah.
And I stress again, I'm not saying every NGO in the UK, which there are many. But
are we playing catch up on this? Is the state completely, obviously, Adrienne, Donald Trump is threatening to outlaw Antifa, to ban them and say they're a terrorist organisation. But how do we even define who these people are? Is there organised blocks, or are there sort of, useful idiots going along with it? are getting mixed up in it. How does Donald Trump define, how you say, Antifa, for example?
Well, it's a well-oiled machine. We've learned that. I mean, they come out, they have posters, T-shirts made quicker than anyone, right? They have weapons. And so we've learned that's a well-oiled machine, and I believe there's a money trail, and we can follow it, and that's exactly what he's doing, and that's what we have our agencies for, right? To do the work that we necessarily wouldn't be able to uncover, but I think that they will, and I think we're a lot farther in the investigation than we know.
John Woodcock, you've had a long dive into this. Has the British state been caught snapping at the wheel?
We are too slow. One of the reasons I was brought into government to look at this was because there is just not anything like the understanding that there should be of the far left in this country, and the ways in which they can organise and the ways in which they can channel money. And then you look at our institutions that are supposed to push back at this. Look at the Charity Commission, for example. It has a budget, I think, of around £50 million a year. It has a number of investigations where there is absolutely grievous evidence of wrongdoing of Iranian-backed organisations, the Dar al-Hekma Trust, the Al-Bahar Foundation. These have been going on for years, and nothing is happening. And these organisations can carry on while they're doing it, and others get the message that actually Britain can be a soft touch, and that is another thing that has got to change.
And a long list of reasons, a long list of Britain being a soft touch on various things. Guys, stay there, we're going to just change the topic just a little slightly. Now, from actual war to culture war. The British Museum appears to be at war with itself. To mark World Poetry Day, the supposed jewel in the crown of British culture has declared war on chavs, gammons, and anyone who's worried about migration. Have a look at this.
There's foreigners falling from the sky, come to scrub our toilets and rob us blind. And since we're in no mood to share, they'll come and take what's rightfully theirs. On orange boats, in lorry vans, invasion is their master plan. Their funny words, their spicy food, breeding in their multitudes. The time is now. The hour is near, for king and country show no fear. We'll blind them with hot Earl Grey tea, sing Jerusalem till their ears bleed, load up the cannons with boiling gravy and gammon, lob sausage rolls till they flee for the channel, send in the chavs on their BMX bikes, then posh city bankers shooting spitballs from pipes, as housewives manoeuvre great big Henry Hoovers, church bells ring out, cry Godspeed, hallelujah.
Yes, that's professional virtue signaller and poet Elander Moore, with a typically self-loathing ditty about hating Britain and a lecture about immigration. He's been pulling this cringeworthy grift since 2020, when that kind of woke tedium was still considered by some to be art. But now, really, after everything that's happened, and does the British Museum really believe that Britain meant to pillage and rape and steal, to enslave the natives, to make them kneel? Because if so, a fair few countries are going to want their pots and pans back, I suspect. They haven't lost the Elgin marbles quite yet, but it's clear British museum bosses have clearly lost their own. Those chavs, gammons and housewives care about their country and every right to care about illegal migration, those orange boats and lorry vans. So what is going on? Well, let's ask Britain's longest ever serving arts minister and Tory peer, Lord Walney. Good evening, Lord Walney. Are you there?
Good evening, Harry Cole.
Why does the British Museum hate Britain?
Well, I don't think the British Museum does hate Britain, but let me just put in a few disclaimers before I get completely eviscerated by you. First of all, I'm not a trustee of the British Museum, so if you want the British Museum to defend its decision to ask that chap to give his poem on National Poetry Day, you better get a trustee of the British Museum or the head of the British Museum to do so.
George Osborne is my next, the chairman's my next in line for a guest.
George Osborne, of course, is a former Chancellor of the Exchequer of Britain, right-wing Conservative government that he presided over. And the British Museum is not entirely woke. It got into some controversy a few months ago by accepting sponsorship from BP, which a lot of people who work in museums don't necessarily agree with. I think they were right to do that. I think it's perfectly legitimate to accept sponsorship from a great British company. I guess what I might say in the defence of the British Museum, which is why you've asked me onto the show, is to say that the British Museum is a great classical institution, and it's been around since the mid-18th century. And it's a big, Greek-style Palladian building. It's quite intimidating. And people like you and me tend to be the people who go and see things in the British Museum. But the British Museum needs to reach out to different people.
Well, how are they,
young people.
Lord Vasey,
you and I don't know. Who
Lord
this chap
Vasey,
is, but
how are they
young
reaching
people know
out?
who he is.
How are they reaching out to people by calling them chavs on BMXs and housewives with their hoovers and rich bankers shooting pipes? I mean, I know the rich bankers probably keep the British Museum's coffers afloat, but this is a direct assault and attack on ordinary Britons, isn't it?
Well, it's an attack on one point of view in Britain, but I think the legitimate defence of this chap is that he is British and he has a point of view. He has a point of view about our colonial history, and some people agree with it, and some people vehemently disagree with his point of view. But he's putting a different perspective to what you might expect coming from the British Museum. And I have to say that he's probably putting a perspective that some people in Britain sympathise with, agree with, and want to hear from. And they might take a different view of the British Museum now. They might say, it's not just one conversation in the British Museum. There are multiple conversations in the British Museum, and we could be part of that conversation.
But it's funny the way it's never the anti-immigration line that these cultural institutions take. It's never the popular, more sort of, aggressively patriotic stance that they take. It's always with a sneer and a sort of looking down on the little people. And this just sort of goes, doesn't this not just solidify people's views of sneering elites who are attempting to counter populist opinion in this country that immigration's gone too far?
Well, most of the museums in Britain are extremely patriotic, and they contain collections that venerate and celebrate our culture. Tate Britain has paintings going back to the 15th century that were painted in Britain that celebrates British painting. The National Gallery has just taken a huge donation to increase its collection of 20th century British painting. The Natural History Museum, the Science Museum all celebrate British culture and British achievements. But history is a complex thing. People debate it. People debate our past. We don't blame ourselves, the people alive today, for what happened in the past, but we do want to debate it with some nuance and perspective.
Well, not much nuance in that video by the poet, is there? Did the British Museum pillage, rape and steal?
Well, I wouldn't use those words.
Well, the British Museum are using those words tonight, aren't they, with their video?
The poet that the British Museum chose on National Poetry Day did use that words, and it's very, very provocative, which is, of course, while we're debating. But as you know, there's a big debate that goes on about some objects in the collections of our national museums, how they were acquired, and you can have a civilised debate about it. You mentioned the Elgin marbles, the Parthenon sculptures. There are some people like me who think that the Parthenon sculptures should be reunited. They're one of the greatest artworks ever created. Half of them are in Athens, half of them are in Britain. They came to Britain in interesting circumstances. Some say legally, some say under some form of pressure. They were originally bought by a Scottish earl to hang in his stately home, and they only ended up in the British Museum because he went bankrupt. Some people think a great work of art like that should be reunited in the home where it was created. And you can have a civilised debate like that. The British Museum has been very provocative with this poet, it has to be said.
Final question, Lord Vasey. Is this a civilised debate, sneering at people? Do you think this is a civilised way of doing it? And is this, it's obvious the controversy this video is going to cause and the anger this is going to cause. I suspect by tomorrow we will be hearing from the British Museum. Is this a net win for the bosses of the British Museum?
We'll have to see. Sometimes when middle-aged men want to be hip and trendy, they can sometimes miss the target. So we'll see whether they can defend it. But as I say, there is a big, the British Museum has one big presence in the UK in terms of celebrating world civilization. But there are other perspectives, and the British Museum has perhaps been brave by allowing that perspective to be aired. All
right, Lord Vasey, thank you for joining us. A noble effort, I'd say.
Thank you so much.
Lord Vasey there. Adrienne, why do the West continually have to sort of flagellate and apologise and dismiss the past and play these woke videos? It's not just in Britain; it's in America as well, isn't it? The Smithsonian's ripped up displays and inserted all sorts of caveats into their collections.
Absolutely. Listen, it's also art for art's sake, but when does it go too far? And it's just, it's inferior. I mean, we see this in American culture a lot too. We see this with branding, with Crackle Barrel, like with a lot of the American brands, and they end up getting a lot of publicity out of it.
Sick of it though, right?
We're kind of over it. It is culture war. They're pushing it really far.
Iain Martin, hip, trendy, metropolitan liberal elites get it wrong?
For me? I don't think so. Look, my first instinct in politics, you know, having covered it for a long time, is usually to blame George Osborne. So I mean, I'm going to surprise you, and I'm going to surprise Ed Vaizey by actually, I kind of broadly agree with him. I think there's a bit of a problem for the populist right, as it's in Britain marching towards power. I think it's sometimes got to have a bit of a sense of humour about this. I mean, okay, that when I was growing up in the 70s, poetry was Pam Ayres and all that sort of stuff, and this is a departure from that. But I didn't think it was the poem that terrible?
I don't think it was. We're not necessarily critiquing.
It was mild.
I wasn't necessarily critiquing the stanzas. I was hating the content. John, is this a helpful debate to be having, accusing rape and pillage and stealing and chavs and gammons and?
No, overall, it's not. Look, I think you can always have the odd thing that's thrown in there to generate a bit of controversy, but the trend is, as you say, relentlessly doing down our own country.
Doing down our own country. There we have it. No, don't go anywhere. Next, we talk about the Supreme Court and big free speech battle. We're back in a sec. Welcome back to Harry Cole Saves the West. In Washington today, a major First Amendment showdown. The US Supreme Court heard a challenge to Colorado's 2019 ban on so-called conversion therapy for gay and gender-questioning minors. A Christian therapist, Kaylee Charles, says the law violates her right to free speech and the state shouldn't be able to tell her what she can and cannot say in the privacy of a counselling room. Now, Colorado argues it's not about speech, it's about banning a harmful medical practice. But several of the justices sounded sceptical, warning that if talk itself counts as conduct, then the state could police ideas it doesn't like. If Colorado loses, conversion therapy bans in more than 20 other states could fall. Now, here to unpack all that and what's at stake, Anthony LaBruna, former Trump White House staffer and the executive director of the American Principles Project. Anthony, welcome to Harry Cole Saves the West. Talk our listeners and our viewers through exactly where we are and how you think the court is going to land on this one. It sounds like they're on the cusp of ripping this up, right?
Well, it's difficult, right? You know, the Supreme Court, we really don't have a decision yet. We were going to wait till 2026. But this is a crucial first step in the right direction. Right? The state of Colorado wants to censor private conversation between a medical professional and his clients, and that's unacceptable. They're targeting, Christian groups who are seeking to better allow parents to have the opportunity to fight against this left ideology on the gender war.
Now, medical practitioners would argue, and indeed the state of Colorado have argued, that this is discredited practice, that you cannot, if someone is gay, for example, you can't pray their way into straightness, or you cannot pray away their sort of gender questioning identity. The gender issue, let's park slightly, but on gay conversion, I think the science is a little bit more closed. This is just a sort of backdoor bid to get rid of, discredited practice, isn't it?
I don't think so. I think what's most important to recognize here is there's hypocrisy here, right? You are allowed to coach a child as a medical professional down the route of changing their sex or their gender, but you're not allowed to have a honest conversation, a heartfelt conversation. Is that the real thing they want to do to their bodies permanently? And so they're targeting a specific group, specifically the Christian groups in Colorado that want to have these conversations with these young people. They're more in favor of permanently damaging these kids' bodies than allowing them to have the conversation in a safe environment approved by their parents.
So you're suggesting it's sort of the conversation is stacked against one side, and the fact is you can, as we've had the same problems in Britain, believe me, my gosh, that medical practitioners are convincing people, yes, to go down one route, which is to kind of cut off their breasts or genitals, at a young age, or take powerful, life-changing hormones that completely irreversibly damage their body. But if someone says on the other side, just to be clear, someone says on the other side, whoa, hold on, maybe don't do that. You think that's being swept up in this ban?
Of course, and I think the rhetoric that is being pushed by the left, especially in states like Colorado. We're talking about 27 other states that have bans on this type of procedures and conversations with minors. If it doesn't fit into their rhetoric, they don't want to hear about it.
And so, obviously, talk us through the makeup of the now quite Trump-heavy Supreme Court. This is going to, the liberal left in this country facing an increasingly uphill battle to defend lots of the stuff they've done, because it is a conservative stacked court, right?
It is a conservative stacked court, but I think at the end of the day, I was very surprised to hear what Justice Roberts said, Chief Justice Roberts. I think what's going to happen here is you have Trump-appointed Supreme Court justices who want to see change, but also they're following the law of the Constitution. They already ruled on this a couple of months back. You can't censor private conversations, especially between doctors and their patients.
And presumably that's going to open the door to all sorts of free speech questions. The conversation between legal, lawyers and their clients are privileged. Doctors and professionals and counsellors. What are the wider implications if this does get overturned? And what's next on the principles chopping block?
I don't know. I'll tell you this. This is going to be a major victory for parents, right? Parents' rights. They now have a say in how they want to treat their children. And the state of Colorado, or in all these far left states like Wisconsin, New York, California, they can't stand in their way. And then on top of it, free speech. You're not going to be able to censor doctors while they're with their patients to giving honest and really common sense medical knowledge so that they can make the best decision for their kids and for their families.
So in your view, does the First Amendment should cover all speech, and this will come down to whether it's speech or content, which I think is where the sort of justices are, but should cover all speech, even if there are medical professionals that say this is dangerous?
I think what you're going to focus on here with this conversation, you brought up, content, right? Age verification is a big victory that you guys had in the UK. We need to follow suit in the States. But most importantly, the speech part of it is between a doctor and the parents of that child, not the states. And no government body should be stepping into private conversations, telling them what they can and cannot say.
Adrienne, on that First Amendment issue and the court, where do you see this going next? Obviously, there's been a number of sort of gradual victories for the right since the Trump appointees in the court. Does Donald Trump and this administration and the right have enough time to, in their view, unpick lots of damage that the left has done over the years in the next 3 years?
I think there's some things. I actually think they've been a lot more neutral than we thought they were going to be. I think even though there's Trump-appointed justices, we've seen neutrality in certain areas. I do want to tap in as a mom just a little bit about this issue. When we were growing up, we were allowed to be a tomboy. I was allowed to play sports and wear baggy shorts and play basketball, and no one was questioning my gender or my sexuality, saying, "Oh, well, you probably like girls." I was just allowed to play sports, and it was fine. But now what we've seen, and I think this issue goes to when is it endangerment? When is it crossing the line? When is it talking in a private conversation versus I'm prescribing things, I'm making money off of surgeries and things that will destroy your life. So I think that's where the line is, and that's where the hypocrisy is, and that's where we're trying to figure out the right and wrong approach here. But I think it's crazy. Again, I think it's crazy to be able to manipulate your body, but you can't have a conversation. I know there's a lot of people that would agree you are born gay. And there may not be changing of that, and that's fine. Donald Trump, by the way, is accepting of homosexuality. Okay, he's one of the presidents that is. But what I'm saying is, as a young child who is navigating all of the left, the counterculture, the ideology, the cartoons, the Netflix, the Obamas, and the producers, they may be thinking they are something that they are not, and to not be able to have a voice to talk to these children, that's crazy. Isn't
the argument, though, the play devil's advocate here, is that actually, yes, this isn't about people who are being asked, are you sure, before making life-affirming decisions about their body. That is one thing, but this actually goes further, and there's activism on the other side in actually trying to convert people away from homosexuality, for example. Yeah, I think there's extremes on both sides. I think that's what we always hear about, we see about. So I think what is striking the balance, but I don't think, again, taking the private conversations out of the picture, you can't just do it for one side and not the other. And it's simply not fair. And as a parent, I'm telling you, we're trying to navigate this topic. My kids are in private school. We're doing our best, but it is a tough
it's a tough journey.
Where it feels to me in Britain is that actually Britain, there's a lot of things that Britain getting wrong. We've discussed many times on this show. There's a lot of things that across the West, these key themes come through. But actually on the trans issue, it feels to me that Britain was slightly further ahead. Yes, we were sort of further down the line with the Tavistock Institute, an NHS-funded hospital, which was, essentially, in my view, committing child abuse, in convincing lots and lots of very vulnerable young people to make these decisions without the correct balance. But there's been a massive sort of cultural backlash in the last, I'd say, 2 to 3 years in the UK. We had a fundamental landmark report called the Cass Report, which basically sort of blew the whistle on all this. And there's been sort of almost cultural revulsion, some of the stuff that's gone on. Where are we on the US? I have a question for you both. Where are we on the US on that? It feels to me like you're still a little further down behind the UK on that. But is the sort of tide beginning to turn, Anthony?
Well, I'll say this, that's what President Trump ran on in 2024, the they-them ad. It's powerful. He took the temperature of the country and moved forward. But, to a point you were saying is, we're focusing on the extremes here, right? Why aren't we focusing on all these individuals who have detransitioned, like Chloe Cole, right? If she had just had that simple conversation at first, would she have gone and had all these procedures and had the hormones if she had just had that simple conversation as a young lady?
No, I've read some haunting accounts. You don't have to pick up your phone to find many of them on social media in books of people who have said, if I knew what I knew at the time, the pain I'm in, I would never have ever have done this to myself. Adrienne, is America waking up in time?
We're getting there. I mean, we're still fighting biological men and female sports. The other issue that we have is we've had TLC and other networks glamorize children transitioning. Okay, we've seen people get platforms. We've seen Elon Musk's son who transitioned, who gets the cover of Teen Vogue, who walks in the fashion shows. So this is very confusing culturally for the children when they get to see what is popular, what's going to make me a massive influencer, how am I going to get followers. This is a tough road. It's very confusing.
What more do you think to be done? Obviously, we saw the massive backlash as you mentioned there at Netflix. It does feel to me there is a sort of bubbling public opinion. Is it as widespread? I think most sort of, what we would call voting normal people think this stuff is nuts, right? Mm-hmm. But it has been hijacked by a small elite, and as you say, extremes on both sides. It does feel to me that the public is there is a sort of more public interest in this than there was even 6 months ago.
Yeah, I don't know why it's been so hard, this fight. I really don't. Because like you said, we're talking about a very small percentage of the population. And for some reason, the Democrats and the left, this is their platform. This is their issue. This is what they want in the bills. This is what they're funding. And I can't understand. I think this is maybe like a reflection of when they stood for the LGBT community or the LGB community, and now they're just adding the T. And so every few years, every cycle, they choose something they're obsessed with. And they are obsessed with this.
Actually, the big debate at the UK at the moment is about female access to female-only spaces, not least bathrooms and changing rooms. Big ruling by the Supreme Court in the UK that basically said actually sex is biological, gender is not. There are two sexes. There is male and female spaces need to be protected. And vice versa. Where are we in the US on that debate? And is there a sort of another legal showdown on that on the horizon at any point?
Well, I think President Trump has been leading on this issue. We saw Governor Youngkin in Virginia just pass that spaces for women are spaces for women. Props to the UK for coming down and ruling on that decision in favor of women. We have a very tough Virginia governor's race. That is what the issue is going to be on that decides on Election Day on November 4th. Here in Virginia. So it's a hot topic, but it's an 80-20 issue. It's common sense. The voters are not standing for it anymore, and we got to do more too, also for women's sports.
Let's look briefly at the politics of this. You say it's an 80-20 issue. Why the Dems and why do people campaign on this if it's so politically toxic?
It's the far left, right? We're hearing again from the extremists, right?
Dragging the mainstream Democrats.
Let's look at the lockdown, right? Mm-hmm. Why are they there? Why are they holding up passing and getting the CR continued? It's because they want to stop what President Trump got done in the Big Beautiful Bill, right? pulling all this funding for this insanity and nonsense. He got that out, and now they're dragging their feet because the far left, Hakeem Jeffries and Schumer are where they're going to lose their leadership spots if they don't cater to the far left. And it's why we have this whole nutcase of a mayor's race in New York City.
Yeah, well,
Donnie.
we covered that. I mean, that's don't think women's spaces are particularly safe. Adrienne, briefly, just 30 seconds before we go to break. Where are the polls? Because this is a win-win for the Republicans, right?
Yeah, this should be a win-win. Again, this is a clown show right now, what we're seeing right now from the Democratic Party. And we have Nancy Pelosi who will come outside and say, I'm flying the trans flag outside. Like, what are you doing and what are you saying? And also, you're just illegally collecting money. And it's just annoying. It's all a show, but I can't understand why they are dying on the Hill. It's a gift to us. It's a gift to the Republican Party.
Just briefly, when do we expect the result of this to come through from the Supreme Court? Not till next year, or
June 2026.
And what in your gut, what do you reckon it's going to be?
I think they're going to come down in the right side. I think we're going to give opportunities to parents once again.
And Jim, do you agree with that?
I agree with that.
All right. Well, listen. Plenty to cover. What a day. We've covered high politics, constitutional law, and after the break, we're going to be discussing Taylor Swift, the life of a showgirl. I mean, you can't say we don't give you anything. Remember to subscribe. Harry Cole Saves the West on YouTube, because you won't want to miss any of that. And don't go anywhere. The life of a showgirl is next. Welcome back to Harry Cole Saves the West. As I said, remember to subscribe on YouTube for more exclusive content. Adrienne Gray, commentator, is still with us for perhaps a little lighter discussion than we are used to. Adrienne, Taylor Swift's got a new album out, Life of a Showgirl. It's not been her most critically acclaimed album. It's got very mixed reviews. Even the Lefty Guardian gave it 2 stars. The fans are mixed. You've got a theory about this album, though. You think it's got some subliminal messages in there?
Yeah, so I think, first I want to start off by prefacing the people that are critiquing the music of the album and the lyrics, because they refer to her as the Shakespearean lyricist of our generation. So it's a pop record. Yeah. And pop music, by the way, is not complicated. It's very simple, it's catchy, it's quick. So there's not going to be anything truly, truly deep. But I will say, I think this album is very MAGA coded. But I think she does leave a little bit of the progressive openness there so that she can still have that bass. But it's very MAGA coded.
So she, MAGA coded,
Yeah.
right. So you think there's some subliminal support for the Make America Great ideals in the music? Give us some examples.
I think the conservative movement in general, she's speaking to the base. And by the way, in this album, she's softly addressing traditional values, conservative values, family, building a legacy, things like that. She wrote a song called Wish List, and she says in her lyrics, I just want you, have a couple kids, got the whole block looking like you. Now that's very traditional for like a Taylor Swift to come out.
What does the got the whole block looking like you mean?
You know, she's very happily married to Travis. She wants to make...
will be, yeah, engaged.
Well, excuse me, yes. She wants to have, you know, the whole block looking like him, which refers to her wanting to have a lot of kids with him. And for Taylor Swift, you know, people love her in her messy era. They love her in her heartbroken era. But now that she's happy, this album is written for cringy, happy, millennial, conservative women.
Isn't that why it's written for cringy, happy, hang on, let's do that. Cringy, happy, millennial, conservative women, this is the album for. It has also been controversial for other matters. In fact, actually, you know, let's look at sort of Taylor Swift's journey from country singer to, you know, sort of all-American wholesome girl. You know, there was a big shock when she swore in her first album a few years ago. This goes a little bit further. There's some pretty sexually charged lyrics in this one, which you weren't necessarily expecting from someone who's been described as boring Barbie. But I mean, she talks about her fiance's manhood, should we say, in a song appropriately titled called Wood. Yes. And then she also talks about her own sexual desires in a way that she's never really done so explicitly before. Yes, it's all there in the prose, but it's not exactly explicit. To counter your theory, it's actually going the other way. This is sort of Taylor slightly more unleashed and being a little bit more risque rather than traditional.
So Reputation, that album was pretty risque. But I will say this is that openness that she's leaving for that progressive left base. However, it is under the guise of how happy she is in wanting to build a legacy, a marriage, a family, have lots of kids. I mean, in this album, the conservative traditional values outweigh her poking at that side.
Do you think you're going to be a bit of an outlier on this one? Do you think there's a widespread consensus that this is where it's going?
I think this is the consensus. I think I'm reading the room. I think Taylor Swift actually read the room, and instead of coming out and making a bold political statement, which she's done multiple times in the past, and it hasn't fully worked with her, I think she sort of was like, I kind of want to play a little ambiguity here. I want people to take it for what it is. But, people want to say 24/7 that Taylor and Travis are super woke because they've had certain stances. But they are showing a traditional path to having a big family, and she talks about wanting a quiet life over this showgirl, sell your soul version that she's been living out.
Now she's made the 2.5 billion and jetted around America. She did back Kamala Harris. She drew a big backlash from her base. I don't know why we're spending so much time on this, but she is, a massive cultural icon in this country of significance. She does have weight when she does throw her sort of Instagram armies and legions behind it, which she did for Harris, maybe reluctantly. Yeah. There was a big backlash, actually, from her traditional base, her original base, the country music base, when Toby Keith, the country singer, died a few years ago, and she didn't come out and really say anything. He was a man who was incredibly critical of Donald Trump and of the left. Is she trying? Do you think she's trying to have it both ways? Keep that country base, and also the younger, more progressive showgirl crowd.
So I think she's just a normal woman like any of us, but she entered the music business, and I think her journey and what she's experienced with producers and in life, in your 20s, you go through a lot of transforming experiences, right? So I think she has truly landed on the soft era, the era that she probably is more traditional than not. She's doing podcast episodes talking about baking sourdough bread in her free time and knitting. That is not speaking to the liberal progressive base that is going out and getting drunk and doing all that. So I think there's a balance here, but I think just like any woman, her and some other celebrities in her circle have been showing that this is at the end of the day where we landed. I think she just did not find the right man that made her want these things in order to talk about them and produce an album.
We spoke last week about Bunny B being at the Super Bowl and the NFL getting that decision slightly wrong. Bunny back, so producer Vic is...
Bad Bunny.
Bad Bunny. Bad Bunny. Producer Vic is telling me off in my ear. Bad Bunny. Yes. We talked about last week, the NFL getting it wrong. Culturally, there's clearly been a shift in America. Politically, there's been a shift. The cultural shift often takes a little bit longer to get there. We touched on earlier about sort of this sort of cultural Trumpism is taking a little longer to seep through. Is there anyone in the music world and the music scene that's actually slightly ahead of the curve and is actually reaching out to sort of the MAGA listeners?
I mean, we definitely have artists that are doing that. I think right now what a lot of musicians are faced with is, do they want to say something to get the viral clip, to get the publicity? And that's where we had Zach Bryan just come out with a teaser on his Instagram.
Country singer Zach Bryan.
Country singer. So, by the way, this man is known for being 5'2", viral for bar fights, being in aggressive, abusive relationships, cheating on his girlfriend's wives. And he comes out, and by the way, the MAGA base was behind him with all of that stuff, okay? So hanging by a thread. He comes out, teases a song called Bad News on his Instagram, where he talks about ICE and he talks about the law, or the law enforcement. And
pro or for, just to be clear.
Yeah, and I can't imagine coming after the only base that is supporting you at this point. I mean, where does he think that he's going to land? I think he's
attacking ICE.
He's attacking ICE.
Right. Okay.
And so he's been in the military too as well. But he's a drunken mess. He's not somebody that's making good decisions out loud. Okay.
Yeah.
But this is something again we're seeing and. The issue I have with this, as somebody who commentates on pop culture a lot, is the musicians and the actors. What they're overseeing to get that viral clip, to get some recognition, to get some skin in the game, because if you go political, you will. What they're missing is that teens and younger people are getting radicalized online by Antifa, by the left, by all of this. And I mean, we saw this with Charlie Kirk's assassination. So them feeding in this narrative where they don't really know much about, but they just want to get a viral hit, a viral clip.
Well, talking of viral clips and short men, Socialist Congress Queen AOC has got into extraordinary row this week with Donald Trump's chief advisor, man leading the charge before ICE and on immigration matters, Stephen Miller, who's the Deputy Chief of Staff of the White House, who is 5'10", I have checked. Let's see what AOC had to say about this.
laugh at them. Stephen Miller is a clown. I've never seen that guy in real life, but he looks like he's like 4'10", and he looks like he is angry about the fact that he's 4'10", and he looks like he is so mad that he is 4'10", that he's taking that anger out at any other population possible. Like, laugh at them. Laugh at them.
Now, AOC was hit by a very short backlash, and she says she now instead loves the short king community after upsetting the sort of lesser heightened people of the world. This is a woman that is built, brand on be kind, bringing in sort of niceties of politics. Imagine if Stephen Miller had a pop about AOC's looks. He'd be in the stocks right now, wouldn't he?
Yeah, he's not going to do it, so I will. The bartender is bartending here. And if you thought word salad was bad, this is word salad 2.0 in a hoodie. Okay, this is embarrassing. And it's like, what are you saying? What are you actually saying? So it's all embarrassing. And by the way, this is the Democratic nominee for 2028.
Potentially, yeah.
You have got to be kidding me.
The worst candidate possibly since Kamala Harris.
Absolutely.
But the Democrats and the Republicans, we saw the sombrero wars last week, a sort of meme war where Donald Trump was winding up the left with these sombreros, and then Stephen Miller, who is actually 5'10", not 4'10", is a bit of a bogeyman for the left, but they don't really seem to be landing any blows. They're sort of scrambling around with these sort of slightly deranged videos. What have the Dems got to do? What have they got to do to get into gear?
It's ridiculous. They keep getting caught up in their own outrage. They're addicted to it. They are addicted to their own outrage. Whenever you see them talking, it's always to slam us. They don't have anything original. They're running on the same issues that America has already responded to in November. Listen, Trump swept the swing states. He took the popular vote, and they still can't read the room.
So she's obviously upset the short king community.
Yeah.
But there is there's a line of argument that actually we're in the government shutdown at the moment, and the Democrats are shifting to the left because of people like AOC and her online following. Presumably, that's what you as a woman of the right, that's exactly you want to see in the run up to the midterms next year.
Oh yeah.
In the run up to the next presidential cycle, is that the Democrats shifting wildly off to the left, right?
Mm-hmm. Listen, the more she talks, the more we win. It's incredible.
So you want her to
stop. I want her to keep going and going and going. And the more hoodies, the better. Because listen, it doesn't look great. It doesn't look refined. And I can't believe that she is going to be one of the ones that they put forward.
I mean, who can it be? Can anyone beat her?
I don't know. It's such a disaster. It's such a mess. I mean, they're going to try to throw Gavin Newsom in the ring and shove him down our throats.
Well, we had America's toxic boyfriend, as he's been so delightfully named. So, Adrienne Gray, thank you for coming. I can't believe I managed to sustain an in-depth philosophical conversation about the life of a showgirl, Taylor Swift. That was Harry Cole Saves the West. Don't tell us. You can't say we don't give you anything, everything and anything. We will be back tomorrow. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube. Harry Cole Saves the West. Good night.